Hello and welcome to The Toughest Choice. I'm Stephanie Reynolds. I am really delighted to have with me today John Wyss, who has extensive experience in AI, DevOps, and cybersecurity as an accomplished enterprise product and strategy leader. He's known for building innovation culture, really interested in that, within diverse global teams at companies including those you'll recognize, ServiceNow, Cisco, and Microsoft, as well as startups including Fortanix, a pioneer in the field of confidential computing and data security. Welcome, John. Welcome to The Toughest Choice.
Hi, Stephanie. I wanted to thank you for calling me out of the blue. I don't think we'd seen each other or talked in 10, 12 years.
Yes.
And, I think this illustrates an interesting phenomenon I've experienced in my life where sometimes you encounter people and you can't remember their name next week. And then other times you see them 10 years later and it's just like yesterday, right? You still just connect like that. There's something about you, Stephanie, where I think you have that impact on people, and I was just honored you gave me a chance to share on your podcast.
Well, thank you. I shared with you why I called you because I was going through the list of people I'd known and who I was inspired by, who was a leader that I felt had the business needs strongly understood and in mind and executed upon, but at the same time brought their unique style of humanity and leadership acumen to the table. And as soon as I saw your name, I thought, John. So that's why I reached out. So I'm glad that you remember me in a positive light as well. So thank you for being here.
Well, I'm humbled by that, Stephanie, but I'll turn it back around for a quick second. I remember you shared why you do this podcast with me, which was, in my view of what you were saying, was I have to get out some of these lessons I've learned. I have to share some of these leaders and their insights with the world, and that inspired me. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so
Thank you.
I
Thank
went
you.
through and started listening to some of your previous guests, and I'm like, there's some real thought leaders and org leaders there. I think in my case, Stephanie, I'm prepared to represent a different kind of leader. I mean, there are those who are naturally charismatic and they've been transformative around missions. I think I represent more of the what I would call a striver, which is someone who has had to work to try to become a good leader, somebody who's had to try and learn and fail and also keep going, right? And I think that's what I have to offer.
Well, it's a great story and it's a great opening because I do have to say, I know that great leaders kill themselves a lot to try and get better. But I think a lot of us can identify with the striving, energetic. So let's go into that. Since you brought it up, let's go there right away because I think people would be very interested in that. How did you end up in leadership? What happened?
Well, when I was a young person, I was all about just trying to be a hard worker, right? My Swiss background, I'm gonna, just power my way through competently achieving my goals, right? And about as far away from being an insightful leader as you can imagine. And it suddenly dawned on me that there is a reality about the fact that humans are not supposed to be alone. We're not supposed to achieve alone. We thrive in community and we need each other. And that the process of leadership is really being an energy manager because you're trying to manage the energy of others in the right direction and unleash what they have to offer. You're not just trying to, achieve your task list, right? And so I've been operating in tech, and I'll tell you, tech is a crucible. It's high velocity. It challenges our notion of consistency because there's constant innovation and reorgs and so forth. But you do have the opportunity to encounter a lot of systems thinkers. And accordingly, they don't fall for any of the soft mumbo jumbo, right? You know this, you've been a coach of some of the top tech leaders in the industry. And so you can start to bring kind of science into the picture around, look, what are your conscious biases? How do you measure your capability maturity? It's sort of a blend of, look, what are the pragmatic benefits of ensuring alignment of people against objectives? And topics like diversity, aren't just because they're the right thing to do. It's how do we bring all the voices into the innovation process that results in the
Yes,
best outcome?
yes. I loved where you started, which is human beings are not meant to be alone. And those of us who work in organizations or for them go there not just to make a living and learn, but to be with others. I couldn't agree with you more. And the teams that are the most successful are the ones where the leaders manage the energy, as you said, of others so that not only do you achieve goals where people bring their best to the table? And that's exactly what I think I'm hearing you say. You allow it to unleash.
Well, I try. And so one of the unfortunate realities is that many of our structures, organizational structures, they are not designed to promote that community. Firstly, we have the challenge of now remote work and disconnected asynchronous nature of work. And the other thing is, things like MBOs, which emphasize individual achievement, and calibration sessions, which, really focus on how much attention an individual could bring to themselves rather than their ability to bring a fabric of people together against an objective, right? Most organizations do develop, especially the stronger the culture is, I've noticed, they develop somewhat of an immune system, right? They're built to detect and reject things that they don't recognize or that don't fit at first. And it makes it hard to be a culture innovator. But I think one of the things that I have strived to achieve is to try to create culture where I can, even if it's think of it as a bubble around you that is like, look, it might be toxic down the hall, but not here because you're here and I'm here and we're going to make a great relationship together.
This is very poignant because, I've been having this conversation recently with leaders who are finding themselves challenged in these larger environments to create that bubble that you're speaking about. And you're doing it intentionally. Some people are not as intentional about it. I want to go back to what you just said, which has to do with the immune system that organizations have to things that they don't recognize. What's an example of that? What might be an example of what might bounce off the system?
When people join an organization, you say, hey, I joined a company. The first question people have is, well, how is it there? Right. Well, I heard X, I heard Y, right? My friend worked there and said Z, right? But I think we have trained ourselves to think about, you know, how do I fit into the culture at company X, right? Because this is how they are, right?
Yeah,
But when you go there, you are that company
yeah.
and you can decide what you want to make it. And I think people have this sense that these large global multinational companies are just crushing entities and they have no voice, right? As opposed to walking in and saying, I'm going to bring my ideas in the door with me and, know how to be the change agent that, I was a little too strong at one point in my career on things like that. And a mentor of mine said, John, you got to learn how to push without breaking the skin, but keep pushing, but do so in a way, so I'm a little more artful than I used to be
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
about my change management. But
Yes.
I do think that the minute we as individuals just subvert or submit ourselves to the sort of prevailing logic of what we think a company is good and bad is the minute we surrender our autonomy as individuals.
Oh, I love that. I love it. We used to describe culture as 10,000 things possibly every day that are done by individuals in the name of whatever their belief system is about what they ought to be doing or saying. And what you said was, we are the company. Once we join the company, we are the company. And so what we do determines what the company is, as opposed to the company's going to determine what I am.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's empowering. and truthful because it's all people. You know, that's what people forget. It's like they're describing the company. They forget it's all people. It's actually people and that we have these choices. So tell me a little bit about your journey. And you've got this big background in product and AI and cybersecurity. So, I mean, this is like cutting edge, right? And talk a little bit about what your maybe your lessons have been along the way. You know, what's gone well? What would you have considered a success? And what hasn't gone as well? What areas have been tougher for you besides what you just shared?
You touched on AI, and I actually would love to get to how I think AI is changing the workplace and how we need to respond to that. But
Please.
let's first like respond to your cue there, which is like, a little bit about my path, only in the sense that, there's no greater gift that you can give someone else to say that other than like, hey, here's a shortcut I've learned. Here's something I picked up. I had to earn it the hard way, right? It cost me this, it cost me that, it cost me a year. I made mistakes. Here you go. Take it or leave it, but you don't have to pay the price to I can give you some, even if it's a small morsel, right? I
Yes.
was very influenced years ago by a quote I read by, the great Dalai Lama. He said something to the effect of, everywhere I go, I try to give someone a small gift,
Mm,
even if it's just, in his words, a silent prayer, like a goodwill, a nice smile, a nod to them. It may not be some sweeping epic, here's some wisdom, but if you can make a small contribution to others, it might influence them, it might help them. So thinking about what you asked, which is, my path, I started discovering when I was developing in my career, I was focused on hyper competence, right? I want to be competent. I want to be productive. So what happens is you start getting more scope. People give you more work to do, right?
right.
And then they start putting you in charge of other people because they think you're going to get more work out of them because you're hyper active. And one of the first things you start realizing is the leadership can, in that traditional sense, can be lonely. It can be lonely because it can be isolating. You have a different perspective than others have. You have different objectives. What I've learned is if that's true, you're doing it wrong because you're not in community with the people you're leading. You're sitting apart from them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And let's be honest, probably much more senior people than I do. There's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of that distance
Yes.
there, right?
Ivory tower in a way.
Yeah, and they carry the tower, a lot of them carry the tower around with them, right?
That's right.
And one thing that, I've learned too is that, to really connect with people, if you have a real conversation, there's a transactional conversation and there's a real conversation, right? And you need to have a lot of transactional conversations to get the job done, and frankly, that's all most people care about. Some people will have a real conversation with you, and the way that I detect it, and I'd love to know your view on this, but is people generally will share with you their pain or their passion. One of the two.
Hmm.
You have a real communication.
They're not afraid of being real.
And there are pressures against that, which I can talk about in a minute when we talk about, AI and the changing nature of work. But I think a good leader is trying to be a change agent on behalf of the shareholders, on behalf of the business, on behalf of the customers. And yet, what I talked about earlier, which is managing the energy of others, is around them letting you in enough to influence them. And that can require synchronicity of your transactional discussions, but it can also translate itself into a real connection you have with them.
Well, I would just like to highlight what you're saying here because you bring up something I think really important, and that is that the ivory tower tendency, and we talk about the broader institutions and we talk about organizations as a whole, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on hierarchy.
Mhm.
And we also assign a lot of capability to those that are in those roles that sometimes it's misplaced. It's misplaced. And to not see them as human beings, but to see them as whatever relationship we have to power. Okay. Mm-hmm. And because there is more risk with this individual, they could fire me. They do have some say so over my career progression. They have say so over my comp. I then put a lot of power and non-personhood, non-vulnerable personhood. I project that onto the leader. And the leaders then receive this. And it's like running into a movie star if you ran into Satya in the hallway, right? And so there's this distance that people create naturally, whether it's a Satya level or it's a first level leader, people will project that. And leaders have to learn to diffuse that. And I'm curious about your thoughts because they yearn to be seen, they yearn to have a real experience with someone, but it is incumbent upon the leader to level the playing field because of the societal and historical hierarchical patterns that we've all been indoctrinated in.
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing things is when you encounter someone younger, or I'll say earlier in their career, and they're very open to influence. They're proactively learning, and they're asking you for advice, and you're having experiencing the joy of helping them, pulling the ladder. Don't pull the ladder up, but pull them with you, right? But there is a phenomenon that occurs, I've noticed, where if you get to a certain level in the organization, that sort of directive feedback, that sort of negative feedback in some cases, or corrective feedback, or just reflection stops, right? Because you're competent enough to do your job. We'll mostly leave you alone. We don't want to offend you. And you're in a good spot, right? And it's rare to encounter a leader who walks up and says, "What can I be doing better?" Right? I had a manager one time who they would come by occasionally and say, "What's in your way? What can I do for you?" And that was just, to me, like, blew my mind, right? I almost couldn't think after that encounter, right? So I think one of the things that I thought was good about, my time at Microsoft is they did have that leadership confidence survey, right? The LEI index, you remember.
Yes, I do.
And it makes you very accountable as a leader because you get this really unfiltered feedback about your engagement, right? And the first time I was subject to that process, I was like, wow, I don't know what to think of this. And then I savored it, right? Because no one's giving you that unfiltered feedback if you're in that position, right? Where you've got, like you said, you've got authority to fire people, you've got, whatever, cut their bonus or calibrate them differently or whatnot. And so how do you, as a leader, if someone's listening to this and you sense that intoxication of autonomy and power, how do you actively every day take an antidote against that? It's not easy, but gratefulness is one thing. To be grateful for your role, your health, the position that you've been put in to help other people. Another one is just really constantly trying to reframe your role as, I'm an energy magnifier, I'm an energy conduit. I'm trying to help others be more excited about their role and more clear about their destination. I'm not here to walk in and decide everything.
It takes a certain amount of inward focus to do that, John. I think someone like yourself who is very contemplative and reflective is needed more. And I think that the leaders certainly that have been on this podcast are selfless in this way. And I think that you all have this in common, which is really caring about the outcomes and the people and the individuals along the way. And that seduction that you're talking about, that kind of power and kind of star status, movie star status, is odd, it's weird, but it can be very infectious because our ego goes, oh, I guess I am cool. I guess I am all that. And then I get paid more and I get bonus more and I get to make all these strategic decisions with other cool and star-like people who, by the way, are human and act out like anybody else, actually. and avoid conflict, which is, I think, the bigger piece that we were just talking about, which is why don't people give enough feedback? They don't want to offend. And then the higher you go, the less people think they're supposed to give you feedback. Thank goodness, like you said, there was the upward feedback that you received through the LEI. I think it's complicated. Those leaders that manage not to get caught in the star system, and either they're, don't believe they're all that, but they got to play along, or they do believe it and miss the boat of humanity, of being a human with another human. It takes work to do it. It does.
You've made me think about something, Stephanie, that was just 4 words that just resonated with me. I encountered, one time, and I'd like to share this story. So,
I'd love it.
I was a Boy Scout, a Scoutmaster, right, at one point, and we used to do a youth leadership training up at the Washington State Patrol Fire Training Academy once a year, and when
Huh.
you drive up there, previous classes of fire academy candidates, each one would make a sign and put it on the road that represented some cool idea they had, right, or something,
Yeah.
and they wanted to pass that along to the next class, right? And there was one sign in particular that I saw for a few years in a row when I would go up there every spring, and it just still resonates with me. And it said 4 words: "Be easy to help."
Be easy to help.
And it made me think about the context of, a group of firefighters who are trying to achieve objective. There's life safety potentially there,
Yes.
and there's a circumstance. And us obstinate males, right? We don't want to admit
Well, you don't want to look like you need it.
we don't
Yeah.
need anything, but we do. And a lot of us, I'll speak for for that side of the fence for a minute. We are not easy to help. And what that does is I recognize intellectually that erodes the opportunity for you to build that relationship and build that community. Now, think about what you were saying of the higher altitude leaders. None of them ever say, I need your help. Few of them, right? They usually are like, come to me for questions. I have answers, right? I want to encourage your viewers who are in very large scope or high altitude positions to think about being easy to help.
That's great. And it just so simply characterizes letting down the guard, letting down the resistance, because we wouldn't be in these organizations if we could figure it out by ourselves. And, people come out of teaming environments, high performing teaming environments. They're always covering each other's backs. They always have each other's backs. And they do collaborate much more with each other and ask for help. In many of these organizations, it's all men or mostly men.
By the way, in cryptography, there is a kind of a saying about one of the attack patterns that occurs, which is, you steal now, encrypt later. In other words, if you can get the data in the hands of the bad actor, they may not have the technical ability today to decrypt it, but they can save it and decrypt it later when they do, right? And on a personal level, this is
Huh,
actually a behavior that you can implement, which is me looking at that sign, right? I was like, "Be easy to help?" I thought it was gonna say, "Be help others better,"
right.
or something, right?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that.
At that moment in time, like, I didn't have the CPU to decrypt that fully, to understand the power of that
Mm,
message,
mm,
right?
mm.
But I saved it, and it took me a while and some maturity to actually get to the point where I could understand the power of those words.
Thank you. Let's start to meander into this new space, right? The AI space and your sense for what's going on and how, leadership needs to adapt and change even more so as a result of what's going on. What are you seeing?
So just for everyone's reference, if you didn't catch the beginning, I do work in AI security, and I'm very fortunate. Local company here, great Seattle company called F5, has a really interesting culture. I speak for myself today, but I do work in the area of AI, and it is evolving at a breakneck pace, as everyone probably is aware. But I also have been thinking a lot lately about how we as leaders are not ready for the kind of change that is coming. And I think there's a underreaction to this from those who have been practicing traditionally textbook great leadership, because what made you a great leader in the previous eras is not going to be the same thing that makes you great going forward, right? There's
Okay.
a sea change happening.
Yes.
I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit. So
Good.
it's not news, right? That AI is changing the pace of work, the nature of work. It's going to accelerate even more. Today, we're using AI primarily as task augmentation for something we need to get done anyway, right? Allegedly, so that we can be more creative and have time for more high valued work. But a lot of times now we're not necessarily thinking where that's going. So there are new models of computing, particularly AI agents, which are more and more autonomous, and they can achieve multiple steps, long running complex tasks without any intervention. So effectively, Stephanie, we're going to be managing non human employees as part of our remit. Okay. They're going to be essentially entities that are relatively unsupervised, that do a whole bunch of stuff that you expressed at one point that you want done, and they're just going to keep doing it.
I want to underline what you just said. We're going to be managing AI employees, non-human employees.
Yes, and I do a lot of executive briefings, and one of the things customers are asking about is how do I measure the effectiveness of AI? And everyone's obsessed with that right now, as they should be. Like, I want to observability of this. I want transparency. I want auditability of this. What I do, we're building systems to do that. But one thing that occurred to me recently is, soon AI will be measuring you. It will have access to your everything you've written, everything you've spoken, your interactions. It will start to evaluate your effectiveness at
Mhm.
being an organization leader and tell you what it thinks it needs to do the job better.
And so it's going to be evaluating, let's say it's evaluating me. All these questions are like, where will that information be shared? Will it be shared? And is that the right evaluation tool to actually ascertain my effectiveness? I mean, these are open ended, right? Who can answer these questions? But I'm so curious about what you're seeing.
So I'm aware of a Seattle company that is actually offering and strongly encouraging its managers to use AI coaches now,
Yes.
which, record the conversation, then tell you, right? You probably have encountered this. And I had a chance to try this out. And honestly, Stephanie, I'm a tech nerd. I couldn't do it. I couldn't take it seriously. Like, I'm gonna allow this AI to evaluate and coach me.
Well, and I just want to go in on this for a second, John. And I mean, when it comes to leadership, I know we have to come back out, pull back out, and look at what that means from a leadership perspective. I'm just curious because, yes, I have certainly heard about AI coaches and actually have been asked to input to something that will help inform the AI coaching. I am at a crossroads of deciding whether or not I want to do that for my own values, not about whether it's ethical or not, but rather, is that where I want to put my energy? But separate from that, the question I keep asking, even if you feed in any of the profiling type social styles, if you input great examples of interpersonal dynamics, of leadership dynamics, obviously, garbage in, garbage out, you got to make sure what you're putting in there is valid. The question I have is the interpersonal, because AI, as I understand it, cannot really reach into the feeling level, cannot discern true empathy, feel any empathy, understand the broader experience that's going on between humans that often is not communicated but felt. It's a felt experience. You can say the same words, read the words on a page, and then be in the room with the person when they're speaking them. And the experience is not the same. And each person in the room is going to experience those words differently. I'm so curious about that little piece of it, what you think about the capability of AI.
So even if you have a compassionate voice and in natural language processing and the algorithms that were trained on everything Stephanie ever wrote, right? That would be a great large language model. So it really is mimicking empathy, it's mimicking compassion, it's mimicking relatability. It's not authentic. Now, maybe that's okay in some circumstances, but it's fake in a way, right? To respond to your suggestion of zoom back out and think about the what is really happening. I think AI is going to end the career ladder and challenge hierarchy itself.
Mm.
Because value creation, when you're paired with AI, your ability to create value as a change agent is entirely personal. You might get value from coaching, but I think the notion that the kinds of leadership, the directive style of leadership that is authority and power based, right, is going to erode because there's no measurable metric to say that that is actually doing anything. So you've got to get closer to the work. You've got to be able to kind of respond to the reality of how do I make others more productive? How do I acknowledge that AI is going to be doing a lot of the tasks, but how can I rise above it and think creatively about how should we direct the shareholder value creation? How should we take care of customers? It's very much a job that requires authenticity and a very close understanding of the business and the customers. And it has nothing to do with managing large orgs and budgets and PowerPoints and all that stuff.
Wow. I mean, on one hand, it's scary. On the other hand, it's fascinating because if it does impact the erosion of the hierarchy and that top-down authority, which I think you're right, there's a lot of ineffectiveness in that model and in the individuals that perpetrate it. What will the new landscape look like and what's going to be required? So I'm hearing you say that we're going to have to rise above what is now going to get taken care of and actually comes more strongly into our ability to understand customers, to understand what they need, to understand what individuals who we may still be managing really need, right? That a lot of the tasks of decision making and leadership will go away. They'll go away. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. AI will be making a lot of the decisions that you used to spend hours creating a PowerPoint so you could go talk to an SVP so that they could tell you what to do. AI is going to tell you what the right answer is. But over two-thirds of business leaders in this recent thing I read stated that they would not hire a candidate who didn't have AI skills, right? But the expectation now is I just want competence at using the tools, right? I just want to know that you're going to augment your productivity with AI. But there's another dimension above that, which is how can you really use AI to do that work, but then, as you said, rise above it and direct customer acquisition, shareholder value, creation process, activating people around missions, right? The other thing is, I think it was about over 70% of business leaders said they would prefer to hire a less experienced candidate if they had AI skills, right? If the AI skills rather than a more experienced one. And so that sort of tool use is valued right now more than domain experience, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's got to switch, right? Because
Or level
right,
out at least.
level out because dual use should be expected. Like that should be ambient. If you're not actively learning how to augment your role with AI, it's a problem for you. But that life experience, that lived experience, working with people, recognizing the need for where should we implement innovation and change, that is something that will hopefully become even more valued. But I think also there is a transition process we're in right now, right? Where roles are being redefined and even eliminated. Rifts are occurring right and left at companies as they experience AI productivity augmentation. But this is shifting power to the employer. And what's happening in a lot of companies is personal and team development is being curtailed.
Hmm.
There's an ambient amount of stress in the environment from the erosion of safety because I don't know, maybe the job I'm doing is going to be gone in 6 months or six
Yes.
weeks. And maybe the work will be redefined in a way that no longer requires my competency, right? So that redefinition of work is effectively, a sort of Damocles. It's dangling above a lot of workers, right? And the irony is that in order for us to really take advantage of AI, we have to do a lot of experimentation. We have to be bold of trying things and seeing what works. But if you're in an atmosphere where your safety has eroded and there's loyalty is dying, how are you going to have the boldness to do that experimentation and to be honest about it? This is where leadership comes in to say, how are we going to capture the imagination and the power of our people to engage in that innovation process while also not being terrified about what it's gonna mean for them?
Well, they could be working themselves right out of the job. What I've noticed, John, no matter what era, and I realize that we're in a very unique era now. I mean, each era is, but this one is more unique than ever. But what I've noticed over the 30 plus years that I've seen hierarchical environments versus more kind of centralized environments is that it always swings back and forth. And so what you're describing as a catch 22 right now is that we can't get innovation in when people are terrified. People cannot innovate under pressure. It actually requires a different part of the brain than the fight or flight response. If I'm afraid that if I help this, it's going to hurt me, it's kind of counterintuitive for people. The other piece is that I've watched the evolution, and I wonder if it may bring its own evolution out of necessity, because I've never seen companies go skipping along into, you know, development. Let's develop our leaders, let's develop our folks, let's give them lots of perks, unless they feel like if they don't, they're not going to succeed. And because it costs money and it's not a direct ROI, it's more delayed. And so I wonder if this is the initiating period. Maybe I'm just a born optimist, and that it will evolve when the results are not yielded. So, what do you think about my last question about the pendulum swinging a bit? Because it feels like it swung back pretty fast.
I don't have all these answers where things are gonna be in a year, much less 5 years, right? What I do think is that the velocity of change is only going to increase, and I wanna encourage all of your leaders to reexamine their role, their style, to think about, are they providing enough direction and safety and care for people who are going through the biggest transformation ever for tools on planet Earth, right? And, people sometimes shortcut that as, let's have empathy, right? But sometimes, it's not enough to have empathy in how you fire 1,000 people versus thinking about how do I not fire the 1,000 people and put them to better use using AI tools or put them in charge of reinventing their roles in ways that feel safe for them. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm just trying to sound the sort of ring the bell that it's only going to increase in its velocity, and I don't think we're ready, and I don't have all the answers, but I know I can at least hear the train coming.
It's fascinating and important. So, therefore, even more so, doubling down on staying connected, creating empathy, being present with people and not being so insulated from them that you're not connected. to them, which is where we started at the beginning of the conversation. So give me an idea. I know I've asked you ahead of time to think about, because I love, when people share here. What occurred to you as you thought about the question about a toughest choice moment or two for you?
You warned me. I'm going to ask you. Give me an example, right? I thought of some examples of things that I've done that I think are interesting. I'm not sure they're interesting to other people, launching tech products or helping a team pivot or something like this. But I decided for you today, I would bring a different perspective. And I'm going to give your listeners the following perspective on this. The toughest choice is sometimes not this epic moment where you muster all of your wisdom and gravitas and go out and part the seas, right? But sometimes the real leadership impact is in the aggregation of many small choices and interactions that you make every day. Sometimes it's the bigger impact. If you have a career at a company, you walk out the door and you say, what did I leave behind? Did I have an impact that was a multiplier effect across all these different people who still will call me 10 years later because they remembered our interaction? Or did I kind of have a neutral to negative effect? But you know what? That one time I made that big decision, I made that great speech and everybody listened to me, right? So to me, that's a way of accomplishing great things, which is being conscious about how you're leading in every small interaction.
Yes. Yeah. Powerful. And, I think sometimes the toughest choice, like you're saying, John, is not needing to be so visible, not needing to be the one, like you're saying, like not feeling like it's a life or death moment, but making that decision to lead from what you're saying, from your values, from your heart. And that can be tough for people under pressure.
I had one very senior mentor that, it sounds like Rogerian psychology, but whenever we would go to this person with, this big fork in the road and, pros and cons, and you have your analysis and the whole thing, they would turn to me and say, John, what do you think we should do? Can we fix it?
Uh-huh.
And it's just such a simple set of words, but it just floored me.
What did that do for you besides, give you a chance to share your opinion?
On one level, you can think about my confidence rose. I always underestimate myself. I know that. But you paid me a generous compliment at the beginning. You said something to the effect of, I'm a reflective or thoughtful person, something of this nature. And I'll tell you, there's another side to that coin. Those of you who are listening and you're an analytical person, you're thoughtful, you're reflective, you know that the other side of that is you beat yourself up a lot. You
Mhm.
overthink things
Mhm.
and you replay a coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? And you have anxiety about that next thing. Are you going to do the right thing, right?
Mhm.
But when
Mhm.
someone demonstrates confidence in you like that, what you're really doing is you're transferring energy to them. And that will resonate not only in that interaction, but in their future. But it's not a leadership instinct. It's not, I'm supposed to be the oracle. You come to me, I will tell you the answer.
We should end on that note because it's so powerful. It's such a poignant example of where you started when you were talking about transferring energy and building confidence in others by actually that example and what it meant for you. This conversation is so chock full of lessons, potential understanding of the future, where we're going, what to watch out for, what's coming, what might be incredible about it, but to help prepare leaders for the future. So I thank you so much.
It's really fun. Stephanie, you have a way of bringing out people's best self, and that itself is an incredibly rare form of leadership. But thank you for being you and for inviting me on your show.
Back at you, buddy. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. To hear more conversations with leaders, please subscribe to The Toughest Choice wherever you listen to podcasts. For updates, please connect with me on LinkedIn. This is Stephanie Reynolds. Thanks for listening.